Desperately trying to leave Dunkirk is Charles Lightoller, who along with one of his sons and a sea scout is heading for Ramsgate on his ship the Sundowner. With them are 130 troops who they have saved from a burning destroyer.
Bear in mind that Sundowner really only had room for about 20-25 people.
But as Sundowner sets off, Lightoller spots a dive bomber heading straight for them.
And basically he used a tactic that his Air Force son had taught him. So he kept a very, very close eye on the Stuka, and every time it came down, he basically veered to one side violently so that the bombs would miss.
The tactic works. On the 1st of June, Lightoller's Sundowner arrives safely with all 130 troops on board.
He was involved in this extraordinary cat and mouse between this tiny little boat and this extraordinary, powerful, deadly aircraft.
By the evening of the 1st of June, of the 41 destroyers sent to Dunkirk, only 9 remain undamaged. So concerned is senior naval officer Bill Tennant about the mounting casualties that he orders for the remainder of the evacuation to take place at night. 24 hours later, the last ships carrying the British Expeditionary Force begin to leave Dunkirk. Tennant and a colleague scour the beaches for any remaining troops.
They go down the whole length of the Dunkirk evacuation beaches with a megaphone going, anyone still there? Anyone still there? And when they don't get a single reply at 11:30 p.m. that night, Bill Tennant signals back to Ramsey and he goes, BEF evacuated. Every Tom, Dick and Harry has been lifted.
The British have achieved the unthinkable. They had originally expected to rescue 45,000 men, but by the 4th of June, almost 340,000 troops had been evacuated from Dunkirk, including over 100,000 French soldiers.
The evacuation has often been referred to as the miracle of Dunkirk with good reason, because it should never have happened. It wouldn't have happened without the halt order. It wouldn't have happened without the weather turning against the Germans for most of the time. And it wouldn't have happened, frankly, without the heroism of the Royal Navy and those small ships and those crucial troops holding the perimeter and sacrificing themselves for their others. All of those factors had to be pulled off for what was genuinely a miracle.
Back in England, thousands of men begin to arrive home, unsure of the reception they'll face.
They were afraid that they were going to be met with hostility, that people were going to accuse them of having left or run away, and they were very nervous about it, a lot of them.
A lot of these people, remember, hadn't even fired a shot. You know, they'd just gone straight into retreat and got back. They considered themselves the remnants of a defeated army. They thought they had absolutely nothing to be proud of.
Lieutenant Ian English recalls coming back to Britain.
We were put into a train, and whenever we stopped, people came up with coffee and cigarettes and this sort of thing. And we had evidence of this tremendous euphoria, really, quite unfounded, that we were some sort of heroes and we won some sort of a victory. Amazing, really. It was obvious, really, that we'd been thoroughly beaten.
And they were astonished to find that they were very often treated as heroes. And I think what that gives an indication of is this sort of birth of Dunkirk spirit. I think it was something that rose absolutely organically out of, first of all, relief that brothers and uncles and fathers and sons were home and they were safe, but also relief at the fact that the country was still fighting. The country was still in the war. It hadn't been defeated.
We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuation. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
Winston Churchill in this speech was entirely levelling with the British people. He was not going to try to spin Dunkirk out into a victory. He knew it wasn't, they knew it wasn't. However, it had an incredibly powerful effect on British morale. It told the British people what the government and the High Command were going to do, what was expected of them, of course, as well. And it did so in language that will live for as long as the English tongue.
The deliverance of the troops from Dunkirk changes attitudes at home and abroad. Anyone who had talked of Britain making terms with Hitler is now an outcast.
Well, Halifax's attempt to encourage the cabinet to begin negotiations ultimately fails. He, by the end of the year, is sent to America as ambassador. Churchill is quoted as saying about Halifax, he has no future in this country.
Similarly, Joseph Kennedy, who had hopes of one day becoming president and believed that Britain could never defeat the Nazis, becomes increasingly unpopular in his role as ambassador to Britain.
By the end of 1940, Kennedy pretty much has no choice but to resign. And it's at this point that Kennedy's political career is over.
The evacuation of the British Army from Dunkirk is absolutely crucial to the eventual Allied success in the war, because it leaves Britain alive as like the kind of last resisting democracy in Europe to the Nazi onslaught. That Britain remains in the fight buys time for this big Allied coalition to form and ultimately defeat the Axis powers.
It just seems to me that the fact that the British Army got away at Dunkirk wasn't just a nice little story that makes us feel nice about being British. If the British Expeditionary Force hadn't got away at Dunkirk, if it had been taken prisoner, if it had been destroyed, if Britain had gone down at this point, we would be living in a very, very dark world today.